There are promises that are never kept. There are frequencies that carry memories, pain, and unspoken love. Nearly half a century after the war, a man returns to Vietnam, not to find the past, but to hear a voice he has never forgotten. Nearly 50 years had passed since James last set foot on the S-shaped land. Back then, he was young, with blonde hair, a gun at his side, and a constant fear in his eyes. Now he returns. Not as a soldier, but as an elderly man, his hands trembling as he holds his passport, carrying nothing but a small backpack on his back. Inside that backpack there was only one item, an old black radio, the very thing that had once played French music, news broadcasts in the middle of the night, and Lean's voice. James no longer clearly remembered the face of the young girl from back then. The memories of war were often hazy and fragmented, but he still remembered that voice. Clear, gentle, sometimes tinged with a sadness like the autumn wind blowing over the river. Her voice had accompanied him through the long days in the shelter, amidst the sound of falling bombs and the roaring helicopters. When the war ended, James returned home. He kept the radio as the only remaining piece of his old life. Every year, on a fixed day, he would turn it on, but he never heard that voice again. Until recently, when the radio suddenly turned on one night at 3:07 a.m., playing a familiar tune, then stopping as if nothing had ever happened. James saw it as a sign. For the first time in half a century, he booked a flight to Vietnam. It was unclear what he was searching for. A woman? A piece of land? Or perhaps a greeting that was never spoken. Summer 1969. The conflict in central Vietnam had reached a brutal peak. James, then a young U.S. Army sergeant, was stationed at a remote outpost near the city of Hue. In the late afternoons, he would often sit with his back against the sandbag walls, quietly listening to the radio. Not to follow the war updates, but to wait for a voice, a soft, late-night French broadcast he had stumbled upon one rainy evening. The girl introduced herself as Liên. She read poetry, told old folk tales, and sometimes played vintage love songs. Her voice was low and steady, yet held a warmth that was almost unreal. For James, amid the blinding flares and the endless gunfire of the night, that voice became the only peaceful place left in the world. One day, after sending a short letter to the station in broken French, James received a recording in return. Liên thanking him in both French and English, softly laughing as she mispronounced his name. It was the first time he had laughed since arriving in Vietnam. Then came another night, after a long and grueling battle. James had taken a minor wound to his leg. He lay in the bunker, blood soaking through the cloth bandage, eyes heavy with exhaustion. And the old radio turned on again. No one had touched it. No batteries. No power. Yet Lean's voice rose from the static, whispering a poem about petals dancing in the wind. The next day, James tried to find the radio station, but found only an abandoned house. Locals told him the station had been bombed weeks earlier. James didn't believe them. Or maybe he just didn't want to. From that day on, Lean's voice never returned. But she had already etched herself into his mind, like a faint red mark that time could never fully erase. Years later, in strange, vivid dreams, James would still see himself young again, sitting by some nameless river, cradling the old radio in his arms, and the girl's voice calling to him from afar. "Je vous attends. I'm still waiting for you." The next morning, James returned to the antique shop where he had bought the radio. The old shopkeeper recognized him and smiled gently. "You're the American from yesterday. That radio's real old, from the war era. I heard it was once used at the Quang Tri broadcasting station." James leaned in urgently. "Do you know anyone who used to work there? A girl named Liên?" The old man paused, deep in thought. Liên? That name sounds familiar. There was a famous female broadcaster back then. Had a soft Hue accent, like the breeze. But she passed away a long time ago. Rumor was she died in a bombing, right in the middle of her final broadcast. James felt his heart sink. Yet something inside him refused to believe that Liên was truly gone. Not when her voice had echoed through the airwaves just the night before. Not when her old message still lingered in his memory. "If you can still hear my voice, it means I'm still somewhere out there." Determined, James set out for the place he once knew, the stretch of land between Quang Tri and Hue, once a violent front line. Guided by the old man's vague directions, he traveled dusty red roads, past ancient bamboo groves and silent fields. At last, he arrived at an abandoned transmission station. The corrugated metal roof was riddled with holes, the brick walls chipped and faded, but inside, relics of the past remained. Rusted equipment, tangled wires, all cloaked in a thick coat of dust. As James stepped into the old broadcast room, a chill ran down his spine. The air felt thick, as if someone had just left or never truly left. He gently placed the old radio on the desk. His hands trembled as he switched it on. The static returned, but this time it wasn't just noise. A song slowly emerged, soft and wistful, the very tune they had once listened to together. Bien no, the sea remembers. Then Lean's voice rose again, not from memory, but from the present. James, if you can still hear me, then I haven't disappeared. I'm still here within the frequencies in the quiet spaces others have forgotten. James choked back tears, overwhelmed. The room remained still, but it no longer felt empty. He knew in that moment that something had not yet ended. James sat in silence inside the old broadcast room, his hand resting on the radio that still felt warm to the touch. Lean's voice just moments ago. It couldn't have been a hallucination. The sound had been clear, the emotion so vivid it tightened his chest. He brushed his fingers across the dusty desk. Beneath the layer of time was an old, faded photograph. In it, a young woman in an ao dai sat before a microphone, her eyes gazing softly toward the camera. Below the image, handwritten words read, Liên, broadcaster, Hugh radio station, 1971. James clutched the photo, his heart pulling him backward through the decades. He remembered vividly the first time they met, in a shelter bunker where U.S. troops had coordinated with local civilians. Liên had been there as a translator and radio operator. Her voice had been gentle, but her eyes always held something unspoken, something heavy. Amid the chaos of war, they had fallen quietly in love. Len, if you're truly still here, please let me know, James whispered. Suddenly, the radio crackled softly, then her voice returned, thinner this time, distant like it was traveling across decades. James, don't leave. This place still remembers you. I'm still keeping the waves, even though time has passed. James didn't move. Tears rolled silently down his cheeks. He understood now. Lin's spirit, in some mysterious way, had remained here, tied to the frequencies she once sent into the world. Messages of news, music, poetry, and love. A sudden breeze through the cracked window stirred an old notebook lying on the floor. James picked it up. Inside were pages filled with delicate handwriting. Lin's. April 12, 1972. Today I broadcast my final message. The war is drawing near. I'm leaving this journal here, hoping that someday, if James returns, he will understand. Love never disappears. It only transforms into waves, never fading away. James held the notebook tightly, and then something strange, a warmth settled over the room. The fading afternoon light seemed softer now, as if the space itself had come alive again. He made a quiet decision. He wouldn't leave just yet. He would stay here for a while, to listen. Not with his ears, but with his heart, because perhaps what he had thought was lost forever had never really left at all. The night sky over Hue wore a velvet cloak of stars. A gentle breeze slipped over the old rooftops, weaving through narrow alleyways. James sat on the steps of the old radio station. Behind him, the room where memory and reality now quietly intertwined. He had stayed here for a week. Each night, the old radio emitted strange frequencies. No longer the clear voice of Liên, but James could still feel a familiar rhythm, as if her heart was pulsing through the static, gently tapping against his own. He read and reread her notebook. In its pages, Liên wrote not only about war, but about tender moments amid the smoke and fire, an afternoon by the perfume river when their hands brushed softly, a morning when she secretly inserted an American song into her broadcast because she knew he was homesick. There was one passage James could never forget. If there is another life, I still want to sit beside a radio, sending broadcasts to you, no matter where we are, as long as you're still listening. Tonight, James placed the notebook on the broadcasting desk and gently touched the rusted microphone. He flipped the switch, not expecting anything, but something strange happened. The red light flickered, then went still. He smiled softly. Hello, Liên. I won't call for you again, because now I know you're not in one place. You're everywhere, in memory, in the waves, in the love that lives among your people. You taught me that. The next morning, the villagers saw James sitting with a group of children telling stories of the past. Not about American soldiers, but about a girl named Liên and a radio wave that never died. He never left again. James began teaching English to the village children. He helped repair the old radio station, turning it into a small reading room. Locals passed around the story of the old Western man by the river, the one who could hear voices from the past but was never trapped by them. One day, someone asked him, "Do you still love Miss Liên?" James smiled, his eyes gazing out toward the river. "Yes, but not to hold on, to share. She taught me that love, if it's real, becomes something bigger than just two people, a wave that never fades." And there, in the heart of Hue, an old wave began to transmit again, not only through radio frequencies, but through the heart of a man who had once been a soldier and had now become a part of the very land he once walked through in war and stayed in peace.